In the final, chaotic days of World War II, as the Third Reich crumbled, American intelligence officers embarked on a top-secret mission across a collapsing Germany. Their objective was not treasure or territory, but intellectual capital of the most advanced and dangerous kind. This clandestine initiative, initially codenamed Operation Overcast, was born from the dawning realization of the sheer scale of Nazi Germany's technological prowess. The Allies had discovered terrifyingly advanced weaponry, from jet aircraft to guided missiles, that had nearly turned the tide of the war. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, recognizing the immense strategic value of this expertise, officially authorized the program on July 20th, 1945. The primary goal was to harness this German ingenuity for the ongoing war against Japan and to bolster America's post-war military research. However, the sudden end of the war in the Pacific shifted the operation's focus almost overnight. A new, colder conflict was emerging with an erstwhile ally, the Soviet Union. The race was now on to prevent Germany's scientific minds from falling into Soviet hands, who were running their own aggressive recruitment program, Operation Paperclip. President Harry S. Truman sanctioned the program, but with a crucial and explicit condition. He strictly forbade the recruitment of any individual who had been a member of the Nazi Party or an active supporter of the regime. This directive presented a significant obstacle for the recruiters on the ground. Officials at the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, GOA, and the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, faced a difficult choice. They believed the intelligence and skills of these scientists were absolutely vital for American national security in the new atomic age. A pragmatic and morally ambiguous decision was made to circumvent the president's order. Incriminating evidence of Nazi affiliations and potential war crimes was systematically altered, hidden, or completely expunged from personnel files. The operation was later given a new, more innocuous name, Operation Paperclip. The name derived from the simple office supply used to mark the folders of the scientists who had been chosen for recruitment and relocation. Among the more than 1,600 individuals brought to the United States, one name stood above all others: Wernher von Braun. Von Braun was the brilliant and charismatic technical director of the Peenemünde Army Research Center. He was the chief architect of the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. This weapon, a marvel of engineering, had brought terror and devastation to Allied cities like London and Antwerp. Production of the V-2 was also inextricably linked to the horrors of the Holocaust. It was built using the brutal slave labor of prisoners from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp. Thousands perished in the horrific conditions of the underground metalwork factory. Despite his direct connection to these atrocities, von Braun and his team of rocket scientists were deemed too valuable to ignore. They strategically surrendered to American forces, bringing with them a treasure trove of technical documents and expertise. Initially, the German scientists were taken to Fort Bliss, Texas, a stark contrast to their previous lives. They began their work for the U.S. Army at the desolate White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. Here, they reassembled and tested their V-2 rockets, laying the groundwork for America's own missile program. The contributions of the Paperclip scientists to American military and space programs were undeniably immense. The estimated value of the patents and industrial processes they brought was around $10 billion. Von Braun's team was pivotal in developing the Redstone rocket, the first major American ballistic missile. This work directly paved the way for the nation's ambitious foray into space exploration. With the creation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958, the Cold War space race began in earnest. Wernher von Braun and his core team were transferred from the Army to the new civilian space agency. He became the first director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. T. Von Braun was appointed the chief architect of Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever built. This colossal launch vehicle was the machine that would ultimately propel the Apollo astronauts to the moon. Other paperclip scientists also held crucial roles, such as Kurt Debus, who became a NASA launch director. Arthur Rudolph, another Peenemünde veteran, served as a chief engineer for the Saturn V project. The program's reach extended beyond rocketry into fields like aeronautics and space medicine. Hubertus Struckold, known as the father of space medicine, made significant contributions to ensuring the safety of astronauts. However, the ethical implications of Operation Paperclip have cast a long and troubling shadow over these achievements. The U.S. government's decision to recruit and harbor individuals with proven Nazi pasts raised profound moral questions. Some of the men celebrated as American heroes were directly implicated in the use of slave labor and other war crimes. When the program's existence was first revealed to the public in 1946, it was met with widespread shock and outrage. Prominent public figures, including Albert Einstein and former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, voiced their strenuous protests. The government scrambled to manage public perception, launching a concerted public relations effort. They portrayed the scientists as good Germans who were apolitical and not deeply involved in the regime's atrocities. This narrative, however, was a carefully constructed fiction for many of the recruited individuals. This deep moral compromise was consistently justified by the pressing threat of the Cold War. The prevailing argument was that if the US didn't recruit these scientists, the Soviet Union certainly would. For decades, the full, uncomfortable truth about the pasts of the paperclip scientists remained largely concealed. However, investigations into their histories continued quietly in the background. In 1979, the Office of Special Investigations, OSI, was established within the Department of Justice. Its mission was to investigate and prosecute Nazi war criminals who had found refuge in the United States. While no paperclip scientist was ever convicted of a crime in an American court, the OSI's work had consequences. The investigations brought renewed scrutiny and public attention to the program's dark secrets. Arthur Rudolph, the celebrated Saturn V manager, was investigated for his role at the metalwork factory. To avoid prosecution and public trial, he renounced his U.S. citizenship and returned to Germany. Operation Paperclip remains one of the most complex and controversial chapters in modern American history. The program undoubtedly accelerated American technological dominance in the 20th century. Its legacy is written in the success of the Apollo program and the development of advanced military technology. However, this legacy is also one of profound moral compromise, a story of ends justifying means. It highlights the eternal dilemma between the pursuit of national security and the fundamental principles of justice. The full extent of the program and the complete, unvarnished histories of all the individuals it brought to America may never be truly known. The story of Operation Paperclip serves as a permanent and cautionary tale. It reminds us that the path of progress is often paved with difficult and unsettling choices. The recruitment began with a list of targets, scientists whose knowledge was deemed critical. Agents from the U.S. Army's Counterintelligence Corps were dispatched to locate and secure these individuals. Many scientists were found in displaced persons camps, hiding their former identities. The process of denazification was often a mere formality, a bureaucratic sleight of hand. Families of the scientists were also brought to the U.S., creating suburban enclaves of German culture. These communities, particularly in places like Huntsville, Alabama, became hubs of scientific innovation. The scientists' children grew up as Americans, often unaware of their parents' complex pasts. The secrecy of the program was paramount, with government officials consistently denying its full scope. Journalists who tried to investigate the story often ran into walls of official denial and misdirection. The moral cost of the space race was a topic rarely discussed during the height of the Cold War. For every celebrated rocket launch, there was an unspoken history of forced labor. The technology that put a man on the moon was born in the crucible of a totalitarian war machine. This duality remains at the heart of the Operation Paperclip legacy. It represents a national compromise, trading moral purity for technological supremacy. The scientists themselves lived complex lives, caught between their pasts and their new American identities. Some expressed remorse, while others remained defiant or silent about their wartime roles. The debate continues. Was it a necessary evil or an unforgivable sin? Historians still unearth new documents that shed light on the program's hidden corners. The story is a powerful reminder that history is rarely a simple narrative of good versus evil. It is often a complex tapestry woven with threads of brilliance, ambition, and profound moral failure. The initial screening of scientists was deliberately superficial. Questions about political affiliation were often met with well-rehearsed, evasive answers. The GOA created new employment histories and biographies for the most compromised individuals. These falsified documents became their official entry ticket into the United States. The arrival of these men marked a turning point in the Cold War's technological arms race. Soviet intelligence was shocked by how many top scientists had vanished into the American zone. The work at Huntsville transformed a sleepy southern town into a high-tech city. This new rocket city became a symbol of America's technological optimism. Yet, this optimism was built upon a foundation of calculated secrecy. The scientists were discouraged from speaking about their lives during the war. Collective amnesia was an unspoken condition of their new lives. The moon landing in 1969 was the ultimate validation of the program's goals. The world celebrated a great achievement for humanity, unaware of its dark origins. The story of Paperclip forces a re-examination of the heroes of the space age. It complicates the narrative of a purely triumphant American endeavor. The program's existence was a classic example of realpolitik in action. National interest was placed far above the demands of post-war justice. The legacy of Paperclip is not just in rockets, but in the questions it forces us to ask. How much moral compromise is acceptable in the name of national security? Can scientific genius be separated from the political context in which it operates? Ghosts of Peenemünde and Mittelbau-Dora haunt the shining legacy of the Apollo program. Operation Paperclip is a stark reminder that the pursuit of the future is always shaped by the shadows of the past. The initial intelligence reports from Germany described a technological gap that alarmed U.S. military planners. They feared a future war where America might be at a significant disadvantage. This fear was the primary catalyst for the creation of Operation Overcast. The recruitment teams often competed directly with British and French intelligence agents for the same scientists. It was a silent, undeclared war for intellectual property. Some scientists were essentially kidnapped, taken against their will in the dead of night. Their families were often told they were being taken for routine questioning, only to disappear for weeks. First years in America were difficult, marked by isolation and suspicion from their American colleagues. They were the enemy, now working in the heart of the American military establishment. The breakthrough of the Redstone rocket program began to change these attitudes. Success in the lab and on the launch pad began to erase the stigma of their past. The launch of the Soviet satellite Sputnik in 1957 created a national panic in the United States. Suddenly, Wernher von Braun and his team were no longer just valuable. They were indispensable. The pressure to beat the Soviets to the moon overshadowed all other concerns. The ethical questions about the scientists' pasts were quietly shelved for a generation. The children of paperclip scientists often excelled in science and engineering, following in their father's footsteps. They became part of the American scientific establishment, their origins a footnote. OSI investigations in the 1980s were a painful reckoning for many of these families. Secrets that had been buried for decades were suddenly front-page news. The story of Operation Paperclip is a lesson in the seductive power of pragmatism. It demonstrates how easily moral lines can be blurred in the face of perceived crisis. The program's history is a mirror reflecting the complex identity of a superpower. It shows a nation capable of incredible achievement, yet also willing to make unsettling compromises. The final truth of Paperclip is that great leaps for mankind can sometimes begin from a place of great darkness.